Why does it feel safer to nod along with a mistake than to risk an awkward conversation? A doctor orders a test that feels wrong, or a colleague makes a claim that isn't true, yet the impulse is often to stay silent just to avoid a scene. In this piece from 25th May 2026, the focus shifts from defiance as a loud act of rebellion to a quiet, principled practice of protecting personal values. While the friction of speaking up feels immediate, the long-term cost of staying quiet often goes uncounted. It turns out that distinguishing between actual danger and mere social awkwardness is a skill that can be built. Written by Sunita Saar, in Psyche, narrated for Ava. You know this moment. Your team is heading toward a decision you know is flawed, but everyone else seems aligned, so you stay quiet. A doctor recommends a treatment you have doubts about, and you nod along instead of asking questions. Someone makes a comment in a meeting that misrepresents what actually happened, and you let it stand. The calculation happens so fast it barely registers. Speaking up might create friction, disappoint someone, make you look difficult. It's just easier to go along. Many of us have learned to stay silent as the safe choice. Keep your head down, don't make waves. But what if staying silent carries its own costs? I know this pattern, not just as a researcher, but as someone who has lived it. Years ago, a doctor ordered a CT scan I didn't need. I knew it was unnecessary. I'm a physician myself. And yet I found myself on the table, going through with it, because the social cost of questioning the doctor's judgment in the moment felt harder to bear than receiving unnecessary radiation. That experience stayed with me and shaped my career as an organisational psychologist studying defiance. In this guide, I'm going to draw on my research to show you ways to find your voice and speak up, to be defiant when you feel it's the right thing to do. I define defiance as acting in accordance with your true values when there is pressure to do otherwise. It's the junior doctor who flags a safety concern despite the hierarchy. The employee who says, I see this differently, when everyone else is nodding. The patient who asks, is this really necessary? Defiance can be loud, but more often it's quiet, considered and precise. It's not about being difficult, it's about being principled. My research has shown that a key reason defiance can be so hard, even when it's clearly called for, is that we're remarkably good at calculating the risks of defiance, but remarkably poor at calculating the risks of staying silent. In my book, Defy, The Power of No in a World That Demands Yes, 2025, I call this pattern conscious compliance, going along with something you disagree with, not because you've been fooled, but with full awareness that you're choosing silence as a way to avoid discomfort in the moment. The short-term costs of defiance are immediate and visible: a difficult conversation, a moment of tension, perhaps a damaged relationship. In contrast, the costs of staying silent are delayed and diffuse: a growing sense of resentment, an eroding sense of self, the slow accumulation of a life shaped by other people's expectations. When we repeatedly suppress our authentic responses, our opinions, our preferences, our boundaries, we create an ongoing conflict between who we are and how we're acting. People who habitually suppress their emotional expressions report less social support, feel less close to others, and experience lower social satisfaction. The strategy meant to preserve relationships actually undermines them. What's more, chronically prioritizing others at the expense of our values is stressful, which over time can impair sleep and weaken immune function, and it's associated with heightened vulnerability to anxiety and depression. Going along to get along, it turns out, is not a neutral choice. It's a choice with consequences we rarely account for. Key points. Being defiant is about being principled. It's about acting according to your true values, even when there is pressure to do otherwise. One reason it can be so difficult is that the immediate costs of defying are easy to see, whereas the costs of compliance are often hidden and longer lasting. Audit what your compliance has already cost you. For 1 week, pay attention to all those times you comply against your instincts and note what it cost you, be that time, money, or something harder to quantify, such as your values or credibility. Distinguish safety from comfort. The immediate costs of being defiant can be uncomfortable, but usually the seriousness of the threat to your safety is low. For a realistic sense of the risks, ask yourself what the worst-case outcome could be and whether you could recover from it. Calculate the future costs of not defying. This is about ensuring you consider both sides of the equation, the risks of speaking up, but crucially also the risks, often hidden and longer term, of not speaking up. Start with low-stakes practice. Begin with situations where the consequences are minimal. Express a preference when someone asks where you want to eat, rather than saying, "I don't mind." Raise a small point of disagreement in a meeting when you'd normally let it slide. Reframe defiance as protection, not aggression. If you ever feel guilty about pushing back, try asking yourself, what value am I protecting by defying here? Maybe it's honesty, integrity, fairness, or responsibility. Defiance isn't an attack. It's an act of protection of the values that make you who you are. Audit what your compliance has already cost you. Before you can make better decisions about when to defy, you need a clearer picture of what staying silent is actually costing you. For 1 week, pay attention to moments when you comply against your instincts and note what it cost you, be that time, money, or something harder to quantify. Not just saying yes to things you don't want, but staying quiet when you disagree, going along with a plan you think is flawed, letting a comment stand that you know isn't right. You don't need to change anything yet, just take notice. Each time it happens, briefly note, what did you stay silent about? What did you feel immediately afterward? Relief, resentment, resignation? And what did you give up? This might be time, energy, money, or something harder to quantify, like your values, your credibility, or the chance to prevent a bad outcome. The employee who stays quiet while her team pursues a strategy she knows will fail isn't just losing peace of mind. She may be watching a preventable failure unfold. At the end of the week, look for patterns. Are there specific people or contexts where you go silent most often? Are there particular costs that keep recurring? As you perform this exercise, try not to judge yourself. The point is to gain insight into your behaviour. You can't choose defiance if you can't see the moments where you're choosing compliance. Distinguish safety from comfort. One reason we default to silence is that we conflate discomfort with danger. The nervous flutter before a difficult conversation feels to our bodies remarkably similar to a genuine threat. But feeling unsafe and being unsafe are different things. When you're considering whether to speak up, ask yourself, what specifically am I afraid will happen? Then ask, is this a safety issue or a comfort issue? Safety issues involve concrete, significant consequences. You could lose your job. A critical relationship could end. You could face retaliation, legal consequences, or physical threat. These deserve serious consideration and strategic planning. They may require you to build alliances, document what you know, seek legal advice, or choose your timing carefully. Speaking up in genuinely unsafe situations isn't just about courage, it's about preparation. Comfort issues involve awkwardness, guilt, insinuation anxiety, concerns about insinuating something negative, such as that the other person is untrustworthy, or fear of causing someone momentary disappointment. These feel bad, but rarely cause lasting harm. Telling a colleague you disagree with their approach, raising a concern in a meeting when everyone else seems satisfied, questioning a recommendation from someone more senior. These situations can make your heart race, but the actual consequences are almost always manageable. The judgment call between the two isn't always obvious. A useful test: ask yourself what the realistic worst-case outcome is, and then ask whether you could recover from it. If your manager might be annoyed for an afternoon, that's discomfort. If your manager has a track record of retaliating against people who challenge her, that's closer to a safety issue, and it calls for a different kind of defiance. Not necessarily silence, but a more strategic approach. Most situations we avoid are comfort issues masquerading as safety issues. Our nervous system, evolved to protect us from tribal exile and predators, doesn't always calibrate well to the modern social stakes of the office or family dinner. Recognizing when you're safe but uncomfortable, rather than genuinely at risk, expands your capacity for defiance considerably. Calculate the future costs of not defying. The next time you're weighing whether to defy, try this exercise. Imagine you stay silent in this situation. What will it cost you in 6 months? A year? 5 years? Be specific.
If this is a comfort issue, the costs may be primarily personal. Will you still be doing work that drains you? Will resentment have poisoned a relationship you care about? Will you have spent years stuck in a pattern that no longer fits who you are? A difficult conversation today might prevent years of frustration. A single act of defiance now might preserve a relationship that endless accommodation would eventually destroy. If this is closer to a safety issue, the costs of silence may extend beyond you. Think of the nurse who notices a pattern of medication errors, but says nothing because the doctor involved is senior and well-liked. The cost of her silence isn't just her own moral distress, it's patient safety. In these cases, the calculation isn't simply, can I afford to speak up? It may be, can I afford not to? And, if it's genuinely risky, how do I defy in a way that protects both me and the people affected? I'm not suggesting that you catastrophize about being compliant, or that you minimize the real risks of defiance. This is about making sure your calculation fully considers both sides of the ledger. Start with low-stakes practice. Defiance is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. If you've spent years defaulting to silence, the muscles of speaking up may be weak. Strengthen them gradually. Begin with situations where the consequences are minimal. Express a preference when someone asks where you want to eat, rather than saying, I don't mind. Raise a small point of disagreement in a meeting when you'd normally let it slide. Flag a minor issue with a project rather than fixing it yourself silently. Tell a friend you'd rather do something different this weekend. What often holds people back, even in low-stakes moments, is not knowing what to say. Speaking up against inefficient processes, even functioning clients, seems hard to moan up about. Even when the guilt is stifling, it seems sideways thing to say. Speaking specific language helps. Instead of a blunt, I disagree, try, I see it differently. Can I share my perspective? Instead of silently absorbing a request you can't take on, I want to help, but I can't take this on right now. Instead of letting a factual error pass, I want to make sure we have this right. My understanding is, instead of going along with plans that don't work for you, that doesn't work for me, but how about... These aren't magic words, but having a few ready phrases that feel most natural to you lowers the barrier between the impulse to defy and the act of defying. Pay attention to what happens next. In most cases, the reaction will be far milder than you feared. People are generally less invested in your compliance than your anxiety suggests. Each small act of defiance builds your capacity and your confidence for the moments that matter more. Reframe defiance as protection, not aggression. Many people avoid speaking up because they associate it with conflict, selfishness, or aggression. They imagine defiance as an attack on someone else. But remember, defiance is acting in accordance with your true values when there is pressure to do otherwise. Understood this way, defiance isn't an attack, it's an act of protection, of the values that make you who you are.
When you feel guilty about pushing back, try asking, what value am I protecting by defying here? Maybe it's honesty, by questioning a treatment plan you don't trust. Maybe it's integrity, by refusing to sign off on something you know is wrong. Maybe it's fairness, by speaking up for a colleague who doesn't have the standing to say what needs to be said. Maybe it's responsibility, by flagging a decision your team will regret in 6 months.
Every time you stay silent in a moment that matters, the gap between your values and your actions widens. Every act of defiance, however small, closes it. Final notes. The goal isn't to become reflexively defiant. That would simply be replacing one automatic pattern with another. And there will always be situations where going along genuinely is the wiser choice. The aim is to clearly see both sides of the equation, silence versus defiance, and to choose deliberately rather than by default. Sometimes you'll still stay silent, but when you do, it will be because you've decided it's worth it, not because you couldn't imagine saying anything else. I think back to that CT scan. I knew it was unnecessary. I had the knowledge, the expertise, and every rational reason to speak up. What I didn't have was a way to understand why it felt so hard, or permission to trust that tension. That's what the research gave me. Not fearlessness, but clarity. The ability to recognise the pressure for what it was, and to ask myself, what does a person who values what I value do in a moment like this? That question won't always lead you to defy, but it will always lead you back to yourself. And sometimes, perhaps more often than before, you'll discover that the thing you've been protecting everyone else from, your honest response, your real perspective, your principled stand, was something they could have handled all along.